here with Mike Molina. He's back on Gilman's campus. Mike, I'm very pumped to have you in here on the Path to Follow podcast, episode 35.
Thank you for having me. It feels good to be back on campus. It's been a while.
I know, right? It's been so long since we really sat down and had a conversation. It feels like there's a chasm in between this year and last year with COVID and not seeing each other, and your departure from Gilman, and you have a whole new situation going on that I think people are curious to know more about.
Yeah, man. So, one of the casualties of COVID was I didn't really get a chance to say goodbye fully and let people know what was next for me. But, the transition from Gilman to where I am now was really a culmination of everything I gained from Gilman. And it was a tremendous amount. I can talk for days about how influential this time period at Gilman was for my life. And one of the main things was that I came clear about education as my journey, as my vocation. And so, a law degree, so that was always an option, right? There was always this thing in the background, like I should do something with that. Mm-hmm. But when I came here, and experiences I had here were enough for me to say, I can let that go. This is what I want to do. And so that's when I started really kind of thinking about it. So what is this career going to look like? What is this, educational career going to look like? And I started pursuing stuff and thinking about leadership and what was out there. And I got some interest. But I was looking for something specific, and I wanted something that not only was just a role of leadership, but was a role of leadership at a school that represented all the things that I aspire to be as a person, but all the things I want to see in the world. And so it's a tuition-free kindergarten through fifth grade Episcopal school. So what tuition-free means is we're an independent school just like Gilman, but we don't charge tuition. So we fundraise to provide this free education for boys. They're 100% African-American in a community called Anacostia, Southeast D.C., which is a historically black neighborhood that has seen better days. There's still some pockets of black middle class, and it's, near some areas of black wealth, but right where the school is, there's still an impoverished community. And then there's gentrification creeping in because it's D.C. and that mm-hmm. market is insane. So we serve the folks from that community and boys specifically. And, so I'm the head of school, and I was brought in to replace the person who helped to found the school, the executive director and president who helped to found the school. His name is James Woody. So not only coming to the school, but coming to the school right at the start of COVID, and then coming to try to replace the person who helped found the school. Mm-hmm. So quite an adventure this year. But excuse me, but I would say, to folks listening, and I'm assuming the audience will be students, parents, the whole Gilman village, Gilman community. Yep. What I would say is that Gilman is a special place because it plants seeds in people that, may bloom quickly or not, but it was definitely, Gilman was a huge part of concretely me, being appealing to the folks who mm-hmm. started the school, because a lot of them come from St. Albans and that whole world. And so, Henry was at St. Albans, and St. Albans and Gilman have lots of connections. Mr. Schmick is like best friends with, my development director. They grew up together, right? So there's all these connections that I'm sure were helpful. But I also think that, what Gilman did for me specifically in the arc of my life, it was a complete departure from a lot of what I had done, right? In working in an elite kind of independent school environment with the kind of history that Gilman has around race and class wouldn't have been something I would have chosen 10 years ago. Mm-hmm. I'd have been like, that's not for me. That's not the world for me. But then coming here and quickly building relationships with colleagues and with students and with parents and with administration and, really enjoying the culture of Gilman, mm-hmm. Shifted something for me. And I think it made me able to be a bridge builder, more of a bridge builder in the way that I have to be now at my school.
For sure. And I remember my conversations with you from sharing that office my first year coming to Gilman out of college. And I felt maybe similar to how you're describing your experience in education is all my friends from college went to go into banking and Wall Street, and that just wasn't for me. But I was always that first year thinking a little bit like, am I doing the right thing here? Is education where my heart is at? And my conversation with you, a lot of the times you helped me, because one thing I remember, had just given an assembly where you're doing spoken word poetry, and you're standing up there and everyone is loving what you're telling them in the crowd, and you were like, where else can I do something like this? Go teach my English class, go out on the middle school football field, do my spoken word at assembly. Like, it really does have a lot of different hats that you can wear as a teacher coach at Gilman.
Yeah, man. I think one of the things, and it's Gilman, and it's teaching, it's education in general, but there's something special about Gilman. It's that you have to coach, right? Mm-hmm. It's assembly, right? These are the things that I loved from the start. Immediately, there were things that were like difficult, but the things that I took to immediately were coaching and assemblies. Mm-hmm. Not necessarily me performing, but just going to assembly and everybody being together and like trying to learn something together, or senior speeches, or just seeing that's where the culture of Gilman Upper School really blossoms. Mm-hmm. And so yeah, I mean, where can you get to have this kind of diverse, layered experience as a professional except at a school, right? And the other thing I'll say is the colleagues, right? So the people that I got a chance to connect with made a big impression on me too. And like I used to say, teachers are my tribe, and now I feel like English teachers are my tribe. So people like Justin Baker, Patrick Hastings, Kelsey Carper, mm-hmm. and Beth Knapp. Like these are people I would have long conversations with about, books or philosophy or history or life on Earth, or and it's like, where do you have colleagues who have so much kind of world experience and have read so much and are thoughtful about the world, and you can sit down and talk about anything. Mm-hmm. You can learn things. It's special. It's a special thing. It's not necessarily for everyone. And if money's your thing, go get money. That's what I used to tell the students as well. It's like, if you want to go get money, get money. There's lots of paths in life.
Yep.
But if you're moved, there's Teddy Conover is one of my guys, one of my favorite guys. Lots of favorites, but
he gave a great senior speech this year about teachers, actually, and he wants to become a teacher, and it was just so awesome to hear him talk about all of the teachers that impacted him at Gilman.
Yep, and he sent it to me, and I was moved. I was very moved, and I taught his brother my first year, and taught him my last year, and it was one of the things I said to him was, there are many paths to teaching, right? You don't necessarily have to go into education right now in order to become a teacher. You can go gather experience. I did that, and then decide and bring all of that experience to teaching. But there's something uniquely special about education that makes, space in the heart, space in the mind, space in the spirit, for great things, great things. And I want to talk about this stuff because this is also a product not only of Gilman, a product of the years that I taught here, but also a product of my colleagues and my students. They all had a hand in it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I think being at Gilman, if you're somewhat intellectually curious, you just have a field day at this school. Like, even before the podcast, I don't know anything about about the technical intricacies of setting up a podcast, and we were having difficulties before you came in, and just watching Cesare go to work here, and his switcher wasn't working to begin. Now he's got, he pulls out the backup. He's got 2 computers. We set it all up. Like, I'm taking that in, and it's like, it's interesting to me. So I think if you have, any capacity for learning, like, this place is amazing. You can go into Beth Knapp's office and have a conversation with her and learn about things that you never even thought about. Or you can go to the science department, and sit down with Frank Fitzgibbon, and he's got a whole new world for you. So, like,
he's well read. I just have to say that he introduced me to so many books of poetry and other. He's a scientist, but then. That's just a special thing, definitely, about Gilman.
Right. There's so many. All the teachers here have crossovers between, their subject and then all of the other things they're into on the side and their hobbies and their interests outside of school.
And that plants seeds in the boys too. You know, like I'm seeing now, I get to see now guys who are in college, and Nietzsche Pandy, who, we connected. I taught him, but he's now, not only is he I think he's a writing and finance major or something like that at Hopkins, but he's working with another Gilman grad, Erica Hudson, who's a teacher in the lower school. Her son has a catering company, and Nietzsche is working with him, and so he's got a business interest, he's got his creative interest, and he's got his like professional interest, and he's juggling them all, and managing to get straight A's at Hopkins, and like that's he's a special guy. All of these guys are special, but that's also kind of seated in them when they come here and they encounter people like Frank Fitzgibbons and you, right? You're a visual artist, and then you're an English guy and you're an athlete. I mean, they see that and they're like, wow, I can be that. Like I can do these multiple things. I don't have to be like some kind of rote finance guy. You can be that, and you can be an artist, and you can be an athlete,
Right. Yeah, that's really what I love the most out of Gilman. And you brought up Nietzsche. He does all these things, and then he makes himself also available to the students at Gilman now. Like he popped into a form meeting last weekend to talk about meditation, and it's like, you see him do all that he does with his schoolwork and his interests with the catering and in writing and finance, and he's also can speak on this subject too, and it really is an awesome model for high school guys who maybe don't know what they want to do yet, and that's perfectly fine, but they can see that there are so many options.
Man, and I'm thinking, while you were saying that, I started to think about the specialization in sports, and I never knew a lot about that stuff because I didn't, the level of athletics here was much higher than any place else I had been. And so I remember being in, coaching middle school and in conversations with folks about Bryn Holmes, who says, look, man, play it all, right? One is going to keep your body in shape all year. You're going to use different muscle groups and make yourself stronger and more stamina, everything. You're going to get more skills that you can pollinate from one sport to the other. You're not going to, you'll reduce the burnout, by having diverse athletic experiences. And, I think that promoting that, for boys, right? Like, because let's be honest, like, I know when I was in high school, I definitely had interest in stuff, and I read books and was interested in politics, and like I had interest in stuff. But football was my life. You know what I mean? Like it was like that's what I did. Like I was a football player.
Yep.
And so I think for guys, if you can, in that realm, in that athletic realm, where we're really trying to stretch our bodies and figure out what we can do and put ourselves up against other guys, and like in a controlled environment, right? Not out the streets fighting or attacking each other socially, but like in the realm of these rules, in the realm of this space, we can battle. And it's a contained amount of time, and then afterwards we move on, right? Like that stuff is really, really deeply important for boys. And if you see it in the, cross-referencing, like playing different sports, and then align that with all of these models of men who are like Renaissance men, there's a great deal that a boy can learn from that. And whether they cash in on it as a youngster or later on in life, at some point they're going to be like, you know what? If I want to paint, I can paint.
Yep.
If I want to learn salsa dancing, I can do that. Like I think that's a good thing. It's real for the world.
Yeah, you have the opportunity to learn and develop new skills. It doesn't matter. Like I do some admissions tours. I know you were doing admission tours when you were here too, and like I tell the guys when we walk by the art room, because that was my favorite part when I came to Gilman. Like the fields are amazing, obviously, and like love lacrosse, and that's one thing, and I love the English department and everyone I met there, but when I walk past the art room, it's like kids are creating this art at the high school level. I always tell the guys on the admissions tour, like, you don't have to be a great artist to begin with, because our teachers and Carl Connolly will develop you, and you will get that much better. It's just that interest, that spark that you need to enter the art program, and then effort, and you're gonna get there. Really,
gonna get there, man. And the wood carving, the production, Gilman TV. I mean, there are all these high level things going on here where a youngster can identify a curiosity and then grow it into a talent or skill. Mm-hmm. I mean, it's special, man. It's really special.
Yeah, and I think you could take that and apply it to anything. Once you realize after your experience in the art program that, oh, it only took me 4 years and now I'm an amazing artist, and I wasn't at the beginning. Like, for the rest of my life, I'll pick up anything, work hard at it for a couple years, and I'm going to get better.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah. That's a good segue, man. If I can
take
us to
take
this
advantage.
Book.
Yeah.
So, this book, I wrote this book. Should I put it in the camera to show?
That'd be awesome.
So this is called An Adventure in, I don't know what kind of adventure it was, but it crystallized so many different parts of my life and so many parts of, what I've explored in my life. But then in a very real way is a crystallization of the time I spent at Gilman, like a very concrete way. So when I came here, and like you, I came to teach English, came to teach junior American literature, and there was a lot of autonomy for us to choose the books we want to teach. But when I came, I was handed kind of the way it's always been done, which is there are 3 books that we teach. Everything else is up to you. The 3 books are Huck Finn, Great Gatsby, and Death of a Salesman. Right? I'm good with all those books. A little bit wary of Huck Finn because I had never taught it before, read it a couple of times, got the value of it. I understand Twain's value as a historical figure and the book's value in an American literature context in a class. But the N-word is in it 217 times. Mm-hmm. And I had experiences in classes where it was taught to me and the teachers were not prepared to teach it well. And I, shut down, or other students shut down because of hearing my teacher use that word, or hearing my peers use that word, right? So I was, it was like, Huck Finn, okay, wow. Jumping in the deep end here, my first year, I have to figure out how to teach Huck Finn. And it's after the Freddie Gray, all the stuff that happened with Freddie Gray in 2015, that happened to him, and then what happened in the city as a result of, him dying in police custody in such a violent way. And it wasn't like the George Floyd incident where the whole thing's on camera and everybody's pretty clear that this is horrific. There are lots of people who felt like one way or another about it, right? So there was room for dissension and a lot of division. So I come in as a first year guy. I have to teach Huck Finn. Everything's happened with Freddie Gray, and Donald Trump is running for office, so race stuff is really up around immigration, and he had just spent years accusing Barack Obama of not being a citizen, and so race was just, the dust was kicked up in the air, right? Mm-hmm. And so the adventure of teaching it, like wanting to teach it well, meant that I had to start doing research. I had to start reading about the book as much as the book itself, and then about Twain, and about, criticism of Twain and criticism of the book. And I mean literary criticism, right? Mm-hmm. So I don't mean people just saying, I hate Twain sucks. I mean like actual literary criticism. So I brought a couple of things to show, because I think this is what is cool about being an English teacher and being in a place like Gilman, where there's that library-ish room, the English conference room, where there's books all over the place, and sometimes I would just go in there and I take that.
Oh yeah.
And so there's all this good stuff in there, and then so I would come across writings about Twain and about the book, and I began to really get fascinated with the construction of the book, what was intended of the book, where the intention failed, and it became this kind of journey of investigation into the writing process, and what does it mean when you're so clearly, as Twain was, trying to criticize certain aspects of America's culture. Like what I tell students is he's savaging race, he's savaging class, and he's savaging perverted religion, right? The religion used to control the masses, right? and he's attacking these things and these triangulations using irony and satire and layering. And if you start unpacking that, you get this beautiful example of how powerful writing can be. Mm-hmm. So you want to investigate that. But then he's using stereotypes, right? In the formulation of Jim, Jim is ignorant, Jim is ridiculous, Jim is gullible, Jim is stupid, Jim is inarticulate, all on the surface. And if you can dig through the stereotype and you dig through the way he butchers black dialect, and you dig through that, you realize he's presenting Jim as the only father figure for Huck. He's the only wise person in the whole book. He's the only person you really should be rooting for other than Huck, right? Mm-hmm. What does it mean when that's your intention, but the way that you do it causes harm? The way that you do it reinforces stereotypes. So it's very complicated, complex, layered investigation. And I did not do it well. I don't think I did it justice that first year at all.
Yeah.
But next year, what I did know is that there was a lot of value in wrestling with these issues at that moment.
From your first year, you knew how complex and satirical and how many layers of the book there were before going into it, or was that over your 4 years of teaching it?
Over
that was
the
a
4 years.
Continuous process for you.
Continuous process. I read it in the summer, and I was like, whoa, I picked up on so many things I hadn't picked up on as a student. And so I was like, oh, I got this angle, that angle. And then I read some of the criticism. One of them is Toni Morrison's. That's the one that really opened the door for me to really respect and appreciate what the book was, despite the negative aspects of it. And they are negative. There's no way around that. There are really direct things you can criticize you can call out as negative that Twain did. But Toni Morrison has this amazing, troubling book, this relatively short essay where she reframes the entire book for me. And she essentially says, this is the story of the perverse nature of racism and how it flowers into this horrifyingly abusive relationship between father and son, Pap and Huck, and this stifling inability for Huck and Jim to really flower as friends. Like, these blocks are in the way. Like, they have all the reason to be friends. They're surviving death together. They're, going through schemes together. They're both on the run for their lives. They have every reason, and they are friends, but there's these blocks that they just can't get past. Mm-hmm. And so she frames it as like, this is race in America. We have, black and white race dynamics. Every reason to be best of friends, to feel like family. Been here the same amount of time.
Because we're all human beings.
Yeah. We're all human beings, but even if you zero down in America, it's like black folks and white folks have been walking this path together for a long time. Mm-hmm. And you could see us as siblings of the same kind of root. But there's this block. And the block is not having processed and dealt with the original sin of that relationship, which is slavery. Mm-hmm. And she lays that out without it being, what could get in the way is if it's politicized, right? She doesn't politicize it. She makes it a human core thing. Mm-hmm. Like, there's love between Huck and Jim that can't happen fully because of race in the society. So, that opened up the door. So I didn't go in. I don't think I probably oversold it. I don't think I failed completely my first year, but it was certainly over the course of 4 years, reading more, learning from the students as I'm teaching it.
Yeah.
Them pointing out stuff I didn't see and admitting that and being like, yo, you're right. Like, I didn't even catch that, right? And then learning more about Twain. I think the last year is where it started to crystallize. And the fourth year teaching is where I started to be like, I got this now. I think I could actually teach other teachers how to do this well. Mm-hmm. And then, so that was how long it also took to write Jim Huckleberry. And my intention there was, over the course of the 4 years, I had so many different ways to understand Twain and understand the book and be honestly critical of it, but also try to get the students to see the beauty and power of it, how critical I think it is to understanding not only American literature, but American history. And so I have all that, but there's this one lingering thing that I can't forgive Twain for, and I don't think anyone should forgive Twain for, and that's the mischaracterization of Jim, and you creating a minstrel stereotype of Jim, which wasn't necessary to accomplish what he wanted to accomplish. And when you read more about Twain, you realize he loved minstrelsy. He thought it was funny.
Yeah.
And it was popular. And he's at this point with Huck Finn, he owns his own publishing company, so he's a businessman. Minstrelsy sells. He grew up with it, thinks it's funny. And so when he creates Jim, he's not creating a real person. He's creating a minstrel in order to be funny, to hide the satire.
To sell too.
To sell books.
Yeah.
Absolutely to sell books.
Yeah.
It's very clear. There's articles about that he was trying to sell books, and this was a popular medium of entertainment, was make fun of the shucking and jiving black guy. And so he uses all of that. It doesn't take away from his, very real intention to try to make us appreciate Jim as a character and appreciate in Jim the struggle of black folks for freedom. I think he wanted to show that, but
he could have achieved that goal without exaggerating.
Oh yeah, man.
So
I mean, one of his main gifts is realism. Huck is a real person. One of the funniest things when you teach this book is that the kids start referring to Huck as though he's a real person. Like, they forget he's a character. And I have to remind them, no, actually, that's Twain, right? Like, it's Twain communicating with us through Huck. And it's funny to have to remind them of that, because his language is so realistic, and his observations are so dry and direct and weirdly innocent, but also it's just complicated and layered, and it's not innocent like childish. It's innocent like someone innocently looking out at the world and being like, why is this that way? Like a 14-year-old boy would actually do. So he makes this beautiful real character out of Huck, and then he, instead of doing that with Jim, he makes a minstrel out. He makes a fool out of him.
Question about Twain. How much of this and what he did in the book was a product of the time period he was a part of and he grew up with, and how much of it is it that he was to some degree racist, or to a larger degree, how much of a racist was Mark Twain?
Well, you can't measure a person's level of racism like that. What you can say is every person makes choices, and they're responsible for their choices. Those choices occur within the context. So of course, him growing up in Missouri, with slavery, knowing enslaved people, there's a Benjamin Quarles is someone who was enslaved where he grew up, who used to storytell all the time, and he actually honors Benjamin Quarles as someone who helped him learn how to be a storyteller, right? He is a product of his time, for sure. But there are contemporaries of his who also are products of that time, who are much more direct about attacking, slavery, attacking racism. This guy named George Washington Cable from my hometown, New Orleans, who was his contemporary. And he and Twain actually toured the country together. Twain would read from Huck Finn, George Washington Cable would read from his stories. And George Washington Cable was much more directly like, racism is wrong, black people are full human, I'm gonna call it out. His stories called it out. When they were speaking together, he called it out. And Twain was much more sly about it. He was much more trying to make a joke of it and all that. So that's a choice. And it's in alignment with who he is, right? Twain is a satirist. He's a humorist. He's like maybe one of our first stand-up comedians, right? And so he's going to take that lane. But that's a choice. And so we can hold him accountable for it. And actually, I feel like it's the only responsible thing to do is to acknowledge that context's influence on him, and then hold him responsible for his choices. So,
Did his view on race change over the course of his life? Did he have a similar transformation in his perception on race as Huck does in Huckleberry Finn, right? When he rips up the letter he's going to write, does Twain have something similar that happens in his life, or is it pretty
That's a great question. I'm not a Twain scholar, and there are many out there, so I'm not going to try to step into that deep water. But I will say, because
I'm sure his perception on this issue changed, just like your perception on Huck Finn changed over those 4 years of teaching it, right? His over writing this book and lecturing and going on tour with Benjamin forget his last name, but
George Washington Cable.
George Washington Cable, right?
Yeah.
He probably had shifts in his perspective.
Yeah, so he's an organism, right? Like every human evolves over the course of their lives, and I think that's also one of the very important things about Huck Finn. That's one of the messages in that book, is for us today. Is like it's not that Twain is either racist or not. He does racist things. He makes choices that have racist consequences, meaning he's reinforcing stereotypes against black folks. That's mainly it. He's dehumanizing black folks with the use of the N-word and the way that it is used. Yeah, it is used in a very kind of savagely cut the humanity out of your body type way, right? It's used in the way that it was intended to be used, right? Which is another really interesting choice that he made. That's complicated.
Yeah.
That has negative consequences, but I don't like the changing it to slave thing. And I don't like taking it out either. I think Twain, because one of the things that we need to remember about Twain and his time is they weren't using the N-word like that publicly.
He would never say it aloud.
He would never say it aloud at his lectures. It was not like, oh, everybody's just saying this. It was a choice to throw in the reader's face, look how ugly this is. This is this ugly. This is you. I'm showing you the way that you think about black folks. And so I wouldn't take it out. I would never take it out. I think we have to face it. And it forces us of our generation to face it, right? Very important. But, I think he was pretty steady in I think he probably, when he was young, saw the humanity of Benjamin Quarles, who was an enslaved storyteller who he loved and admired. He probably saw humanity beyond what society was telling him about black folks. And I think that kind of rhythm stayed with him as he lived. Now, he didn't always act on it in every circumstance, but he did act on it in some other circumstances. So he, I probably shared the story with you that he paid for one of the first black Yale Law students.
Yep.
Warner T. McGuinn, who was a Baltimore guy, came to Baltimore and ended up being a mentor to Thurgood Marshall, right? And Twain pays for his tuition to Yale Law and says every white person with a lot of money should pay for a black man, or, I don't know if he said black man or black person, to go to law school so that so we can help them get on their feet and like fight for themselves, right? So very clearly, almost like a reparations argument, like this needs to be repaired. I'm going to do my part. And he pays for other students to go to school at HBCUs and other places. So he put his money where his mouth is, right? And so I don't know that it's so much that there's a steady evolution. And it's the same with Huck. If you look at the book, this is what's so amazing about Twain, right? It's almost like he's confessing, because Huck goes through these evolutions and you think he's figured it out when he tears up the letter and he says, all right, I'll go to hell. I don't care. I love Jim, right? He didn't say those words, but he essentially says, I love Jim more than my own soul.
Right, and that's what his action says.
Right. I'm willing to burn in hell to save my friend, right? But then at the end, he says to Jim, in order to kind of crystallize the final moment of like, I see you as a full human, Jim, he says, Jim, I knew you was white inside. And just undercuts it all, because now it's saying in order to be fully human, you have to be white inside. So I can't see your humanity as a black man. I can only see your humanity if I think that you're inside a white man. Twain, I don't think Twain is not an idiot. Twain is, I think you could call him a genius. So when he writes that line at the end of the book and undercuts all of
it's a decision.
It's a decision. And what he's saying, I think, is it's not this steady evolution from racism away from racism. It's a constant struggle and facing of it and saying, so what would have happened, in a real life situation in this day and age of microaggressions and stuff, is Huck says that. And, hopefully a fully formed Jim says, hey, Huck, let me explain to you why that's not the thing to say and what's wrong with what you just said.
Right.
And then Huck says, oh, crap. Oh, yeah, I need to do better. And then they go on with their friendship, and then sometime maybe Huck says something else or Jim says something else, and they have to have a conversation about that. And that evolution isn't a steady thing. It's like a mountain, right?
Yeah.
So he evolved, but he took steps forward and steps back and left and right,
and that's really the story of America and its contradictions, right? It's Huck Finn, it's Twain's life, it's it's really every human is just a huge mess of contradictions like that, trying to figure out what's right, what's wrong, where we misstep, where we are correct.
Yep.
You know,
Yep.
he's a complex American icon, really. My question for you is, if you were doing the podcast and you were the podcast host and you had Twain on here and you've studied him for so long, you know a lot about him and his works, what questions or points of confrontation would you maybe bring up to talk about with him?
Wow. That's an excellent question. I hope you ask questions like this of your students. That is what you call a dope question. So I'm going to think a lot about that, and maybe I'll write a spoken word poem about that.
That'd be great.
Shout out. Caroline Hervey, one of my students last year, instead of writing a paper, she asked me, instead of just a literary analysis paper, if she could write a creative paper imagining Twain's writing process. And so she wrote like a journal, a series of kind of journal entries of Twain as he's thinking through how he's writing Huck Finn. He's like deciding what to do about the N-word and deciding to do what about this and what about that. It was fascinating. It was the first student had ever asked to do something like that, and it was well done. But I'm stalling right now because I have no good
That's
answer
all right.
for you.
You can
but
come.
I would say this. I would give him Jim Huckleberry. So this book is intended to have a conversation with Mark Twain.
That's perfect.
I don't know how else to do it. He's not alive, and he's, vastly more, accomplished as a writer than I don't know if I'll ever be. So this would start a conversation. So this book is intended to rewrite Jim. So it's the entire story of Huck Finn, same story arc, but it follows Jim. So there are points in Twain's book, Huck Finn, where Jim just disappears from the story because he's following Huck. Mm-hmm. And for days, maybe weeks, you have no idea what's going on with Jim. And it's like, wait a minute, he's running from enslavement. Mm-hmm. Something's going on with him. What is he doing? Is he hiding? Is he meeting people? What's happening? And what is he thinking all this time, right? So I investigate that. And so there are moments where Huck disappears from this book and we follow Jim. And he speaks in this kind of poetic language. That's my thing. And that's to try and rescue him from that dialect that Twain, restrains him and captures in him. So to answer your question, now that I've stalled a whole lot.
Well, yeah. I listened to the introduction and a little bit of chapter 1 on SoundCloud, which I loved how do you read the whole book is there an audio version? I think that'd be pretty cool too.
Yeah. I have a full-time job.
I know you're a busy man.
I think about it and I'm like, yeah, if I scheduled it every Saturday to read, but it's not just the reading, as you know, it's like the production part of it. It's like editing it and takes and then
in the beginning, in the intro, you have the music in the background, which is cool.
Yeah, and that took a while, right?
Yeah,
so
right. It's not easy.
I'm looking at the hours and I'm like, this would likely take me 6 months. And I have some really important stuff to do on a daily basis.
Right. Maybe it's a summer project.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly, in the summer. And
What was your writing process like for Jim Huckleberry, and where did this idea originate? Maybe it was a whole process over your 4 years teaching the book, but when was the moment where you're like, I need to write this conversation with Mark Twain about Huck Finn?
Well, can I read something for you real quick?
That'd be great.
This is not my writing. I'll if you want, I can read a little bit of Jim Huck and spit a little poem for you too. I brought one. I have one in mind. But this was not the book that I used in my first year, but I found this later and it captures a lot of what I'm trying to do with Jim Huckleberry. So in, quote, An American Dilemma, this is book, it's called The Jim Dilemma, Reading Race in Huckleberry Finn by Joycelyn Chadwick Joshua. It's a Black woman literary critic who, like me, sees the value of this book and of Twain and wants to help teachers understand how to teach it well. So in, quote, An American Dilemma, Ralph Ellison asks whether, quote, American Negroes are simply the creation of white men, or have they at least helped to create themselves out of what they have found around them, quote. Mark Twain compels the reader of Adventures of Huckleberry Finn to address not only this question, but the question of visibility and legacy. The novel challenges the white reader to learn about and experience a traumatic and debasing period in American history, true, as well as discovering the unique circumstances of American literary history. So history and American literary history, this book delivers messages to white readers. At the same time, Twain presents to this audience a covenant of hope in the unlikeliest of places with the unlikeliest of characters. For Twain's African American audience, the novel necessitates, if not a complete celebration for and recovery of the slave of the South, at least an acknowledgement of the traits that defined and molded a people, a spirit and a vision of the next century's progeny. Resilience, tenacity, resourcefulness, and passion for freedom, family, and ultimately a passion for the American ideal. So Jim has that in him. Twain put that in him, right? Mm-hmm. Where you could see a core of the African American experience. Like, he's resilient, he's resourceful, he's strong, he's compassionate, mm-hmm. he's willing to go, wherever he needs to go to get free, all that stuff. Mm-hmm. And if you can, kind of unpack Twain and unpack the historical context, you find these jewels of like wisdom for us even today. Mm-hmm. So the book really was that process of unpacking Twain and understanding it. Toni Morrison was my spiritual guide throughout the whole process. Not only her article, This Amazing Troubling Book, but Beloved, which I also taught my first year and stopped because I was not good enough a teacher to teach it well.
It's a hard one to teach.
That's a hard book to teach well. And I realized at the end of that, I was like, I can't do this justice. I'm not prepared to do this justice. But reading Twain at the start of the year and then Beloved right at the end of the first semester created these poles mm-hmm. that kind of pulled me and opened up space for me to say, how am I going to deal with this book? I know there's value in it, and what do I do? And that's when I started saying, I'm going to start I just started with a chapter. I'm going to rewrite the first chapter from Jim's perspective. And then once I wrote it, I felt like I want to keep writing this. and I kept working on it. I assigned some chapters to students and said, read it and cut it apart, tear it up, you know what I mean? And got feedback from students. I talked to Justin Baker about it. I talked to Kelsey Carper about it, John Rowell, Patrick. A lot of people don't want to teach it, right? Like, a lot of people at Gilman are like, I don't like the book. I'm not teaching it. And so I was curious about that and wanted to know why and how come I see all this in it and this really smart other person does not see it and or sees it and just doesn't want the drama that comes along with it. So those conversations helped to form it. And but the impulse was, I could see the value of the book. And it's a controversial book that people don't want to teach and kids don't want to read. That is like, no, look at it. I wanted to say, look at it, face it.
Yep.
And the best way that started to form to do that, outside of being a teacher, was to try to tell this story.
And I wonder why that is, because you said when you came in, it was like the 3 books that you were given, Huck Finn was one of them. And when I was in high school, it was like a staple of the curriculum. You read Huck Finn. And now, like, when teachers have the choice of teaching it or not, there's reluctance to do it. Yeah. And you dove right into it, but other teachers, there are reasons maybe why they don't want to. It's maybe confronting these difficult questions. They're not easy, especially with students, and guiding some of those conversations in the classroom can be, radioactive a little bit.
Great word.
Yeah.
Radioactive.
Yeah.
Radioactive, which we, think about radioactive stuff, right? You don't just feel bad in the moment with radioactive stuff. You take it with you. It like comes with you in your DNA, right? Mm-hmm. And that's the damage it does is over the long term. And that's kind of like teaching Twain or Huck Finn specifically in a way that's not informed can be radioactive. Mm-hmm. Everyone can walk out of that experience worse off, including the teacher and the kids. And so teachers are like, I would rather not. I think there's other books to teach. There are other ways to do what we want to do. And I'm not saying everybody has to read Huck Finn. I just think if you get, remember, I'm reading all kinds of books. There's another one I didn't bring called Huck Finn's America. It's not about Huck Finn. It's not about Twain as much as it's about the context in which Twain is writing. So it's about America at that time. Fascinating book. Andrew Levy, Huck Finn's America. If you're going to teach Huck Finn, and I think there's a lot of value in teaching it, you got to do all this extra reading. You got to go to workshops and trainings. You got to try and find real ways to do it well. You can't just jump in there and do it. You got to prepare. But a real, somebody like who's really a real curious teacher and who understands how important it is to wrestle with these issues will do that. They'll do that. In my book, honestly, the book is designed for teachers. My market, I want teachers to get this book because I want to offer an alternative, because I also don't know if you have to teach the entirety of the book. I think many critics...
Because that's a common thing is like, I don't want to teach the whole Huck Finn, I want to teach parts of it.
Yeah, he loses his way. I mean, he's a writer, right? Like, and he loses his way at different points. So there's whole chunks of the book that you could do without. The section with the Duke and the Dolphin... It's just, a long series of ridiculous adventures in which Jim is tortured, Huck is tortured, and it doesn't really add anything. It's just social commentary. It's Twain attacking, politics and which is, hey, there's stuff, there's value in it, but you don't have to teach that stuff in my mind. So what I would say is teach excerpts of it, and then teach excerpts of my book that are in conversation with it.
That's cool.
So then it opens up space to be like, whoa, my choice was to use, so the N-word appears, I say 33 times in my book, and it's all in one monologue, right when my version of the Duke and Dolphin characters, they're called the Jack and the Joker, right when the Joker, decides he's gonna sell Jim back into slavery, and he gives him this long monologue. It's like, I don't really have a choice. This is what I gotta do. There's no other way. This is the way of the world. You're an N-word, and that's what we do with N-words, right? Like that's the only place in the book where it appears. But there's one other segment right before where I tease the reader, like way earlier, I guess, where I have all these words that rhyme with the N-word. And so I have a whole kind of paragraph of rhyming with the N-word. And what I'm hoping to do is build tension in the reader, like, oh, we're about to go here, oh, here it comes, but it doesn't. And then if you look at the words I'm using to describe Jim in that moment, they're worse than the N-word. Like not in the, like American kind of lexicon, but what's being said about Jim explains the N-word. What's so bad about the N-word, right? Without using it, I'm characterizing like how bad it is. And there are choices like that a teacher could really use to help the students understand the N-word and why, it's not just a word. We don't need to just get over it. It actually carries power in it because it carries all these messages that end up in lynching, that end up in, voter disenfranchisement, that end up in accusing somebody of not being from the country, that end up in, there's all this stuff there. So, yeah.
Well, it's the most dehumanizing word, I think, in the English language. And I know before you begin teaching Huck Finn, that's what you discuss with your classes, that word. And we had conversations in the English department about that too. When you discuss that over a course of an 80-minute period that first day, what kind of questions do you want your students to think about in terms of that word and how it appears 217 times, right, in Huck Finn?
Yeah. That's another good question, man. You're a teacher. I can tell. So what kind of questions do I want them to walk out of that first class with?
Because you're not telling them how it's going to go as a teacher. You're asking them to decide what they think is right.
Well, yeah. It's yes with a caveat, right? So it's like modified consensus. So we can come to consensus, but I have the final say. Right. But I do open up the discussion. And so if I were to answer your question, I want them to walk out of that room wanting to know why this word hurts people, wanting to know the background of the word, wanting to know and make a decision about what's the right thing to do with the word. And so I have a whole process, and this is something I have taught to other teachers, where Jay-Z has this song called The Story of O.J., And it's not only uses the N word in the more colloquial, black, dialect way of using it, but also he's using it satirically and ironically. And then the video is nothing but a minstrel, a play on old cartoon minstrel stuff. And so we engage that video, we engage Toni Morrison's writing, we engage where she talks about, the N word, and then we make a decision as to whether we're going to utter the word, right? I hold my cards saying that I'm not going to allow us to utter it. That's just the rule that I have in my room. But I say to them, let's decide as a class what we should do with it. And they wrestle with that. And then I say, well, then if we're not going to say it, what do we do when we come to it, when we're reading out loud? Are we just...
Because it's in every paragraph.
Yeah,
almost,
it's
right?
like, are we just going to pretend it's not there? Are we going to... And so what do we do then? Do we say slave? Do we say something else? And people give different suggestions, and we read about the ways different people have tried to handle that throughout history. And what we generally come to, because this is one of the the options I give them, and it's I think it's probably the best option, and they can probably sense that. So I know there might be a little bit of like, oh, we better go with this because it seems like he likes this idea, right? There might be some of that going on, but it's to pause. So when you come to the word, you acknowledge its presence and you pause, and then keep reading. So we don't pretend like it's not there, but we don't utter it. We acknowledge the weight of the word with silence, and then we keep reading. So, that's what we got to, what I got to about how to use it. And but that, that's a great way to think of it. Like after that first class, for any of you out there wanting to teach Huck Finn, that's a question you need to ask yourself before you teach the book. That first class, before we even crack the book or before we really start, what questions do I want them to walk out of that class with, so that when we go into the book, they carry those questions into the book? That's a good way to frame it, man. And I don't think I've thought of it that way, but I do think that's what I was up to without thinking of it that way. And,
going into the book, but I think the other question is when students come out of those 4 weeks or 5 weeks of reading Huck Finn, what types of questions do you think you're setting up for them to think about as they go on with their life and go into the world and go to college, right? That's really what you're doing when you're teaching any type of literature, but Huck Finn, for you especially, you are tailoring your lessons and your teachings to complicate their thinking as they move forward.
Absolutely complicated. I want them to walk out of their questioning the nature of freedom, questioning the nature of race and its impact on their lives as well as American history. And what they carry, I think, throughout the rest of one of the most important things that they need to walk out of this book with is understanding irony. Understanding irony, the power of it and how it works. And they don't fully get it, I don't think. I usually end my years with The Handmaid's Tale, and so the voice offered in The Handmaid's Tale, the narrator, she's kind of sardonic and she has these biting reflections on life, and there's irony, there's a little bit of misdirection in some of the things that she says. There's layers to it, and they can see it better because they read Huck Finn. They can see it better. So even just on the plane of like learning literature and being ushered to the doorstep of college writing, because that's what we do in junior year, right? We're taking them from book reports to now analysis and having your own opinion and trying to defend it and trying to like make sense of a book, right? Not just say what happened. And we're ushering them to that. And then you polish them off a little bit as seniors, and then they should be college writers, right? So we play this is an important year.
Yeah, junior year for sure.
Yeah, man. So.
Yeah, and that's a next level skill, I think, recognizing satire in writing, because it is so powerful. And Twain was, the best, maybe the best ever at satire. Just being able to recognize that in any literature, in any show that you're watching, it's everywhere.
It forces you to get below the surface, right? And once you get below the surface, it gets really messy. But that's life. That's real life. right?
And that's why it's so powerful. Is it's not like Twain's overtly telling you anything. He's playing games underneath the surface.
Yeah, and the value of it is when you uncover something, right? So if the author tells you racism is bad, you'll be like, yeah, or no, or kinda, or what do you do with that? But if the author puts a puzzle in front of you, and then you piece it together, and you go like, whoa, racism is bad. That's rooted in you because you made that discovery. And I think writers have to, as a writer, I've had to learn that, and not be so direct and not be so upfront. But then the balance is you also can't be so esoteric that nobody knows what the heck you're saying.
Yeah.
Right? You got to balance that. Twain was great at that.
Middle ground.
Yeah.
So speaking of the way that Twain wrote and the form that he constructed Huck Finn, why'd you choose the form that you did for Jim Huckleberry, and how'd you kind of get into that type of writing or spoken word? How'd you get into that as really a craft?
So I started writing poetry in law school, like real poetry. Like I'd written stuff before, but I went to graduate school and I was around a lot of poets, and I was too shy about getting out there. It was New York. It was 1997. New Yorican Poetry Cafe. Like it was intimidating. Like, and I wasn't a polished writer, never really performed stuff. So I was an organizer of shows. I was one of these people. We had a group called Blackout Arts Collective, a tribe, a real dedicated artists who also had a social justice perspective and wanted to change the world through the arts. And so we had Blackout Arts Collective in New York, and it was rooted at NYU. And some people were performers, and others of us were organizers. So we helped throw the event. So that's who I was. Then I go to law school, and one of my oldest friends, Breon Bain, was one of the founders of Blackout Arts Collective, happened to be at Yale at the same time because his wife was at Yale Medical School. And we were like, let's start Blackout New Haven. So we start Blackout New Haven. New Haven is not New York. So, not shy, but like, I don't have like, I'm not a big ego guy. Like I can get out there and do what he does. I'm much more like, whoa, that's impressive. I don't know if I could do that, right? But in New Haven, it's a smaller world. It's close enough to New York where you can feel like you're doing something. So I jump out there and I start performing. This is my first spoken word piece. I'll give it to you now.
Yeah.
And it was just a little background. Breon Bain, the cat I was just talking to you about, he, myself, and some other artists made something called Lyrics on Lockdown. And so and when I was in law school, I would go do work in prisons, like helping people get their GED. And we were working on prison reform. So got some grant money and traveled around the country, going to juvenile halls, doing spoken word poetry in the juvenile halls to inspire the young people to be like, hey, I know you've been through a lot. I know you're going through a lot. Writing is an outlet. Writing is a way to process. Writing is something that you can do well and feel good about yourself, right? And so trying to inspire young people who are locked up to write. So we traveled, we literally traveled from New Haven to Chicago to the West Coast, and then back through the South, through New Orleans and Atlanta, back up.
That's amazing.
Yeah, it was amazing. And so on that journey, I had started writing this piece. And then by the time we got to Atlanta, which was the last leg, we went into this juvenile hall, and I encountered a young man who was like 11 years old, which, just think about an 11-year-old. My son is 11, and he's tiny.
My little sister's 11, yeah.
Can you imagine an 11-year-old locked up? But they have juvenile halls, at least in Atlanta, where there was, I don't know if it's still the case, but it's an 11-year-old child. And something in there, I'm seeing this kid, he's got big old eyes. And I'm like, what is happening here? How do we have an 11-year-old child in here?
Yeah.
And so I left that, when we left there, we were driving around in a van. The next place we went, I sat in the van for a while and cried, and then started writing. And it was about my cousin. So while I was in law school, my cousin was in prison. And he was my only male cousin, same age cousin. I grew up in New Orleans. He grew up in New York because his, dad had moved from New Orleans to New York. And so this is that piece. The monstrosity of turning bodies into commodities to boost the stock indices of private prison industries is an atrocity and makes a mockery of democracy. Now follow me. My cousin from Brooklyn, they took him. And now he's locked up in a federal prison serving a mandatory minimum 25 years for his third strike. The state sheds no tears when it takes a life. See, me and D, we used to do petty thefts for child's play, like any young ones making dumb young mistakes, but the mistakes came bigger where my cousin stayed. See, Cuz knew gun-running thugs who served cheese and slugs, these teenagers tasting blood with that gangster grudge, and they showed Cuz love, or I guess that's what it was. They took him on a corner and made him part of their team. At 16, with short-sighted dreams, he took trips to whipped cream, and on his way back from VA, bringing back guns for pay, Jersey Jakes gave chase, and Cuz got caught for strike one. And now my young Cuz is marked for the hunt. See, I know it's folks like me in prison. They look like me and think like me. It's folks that have made mistakes, and I sure can relate because it's folks just like me in prison, and I was lucky. At 16, I had the choice to express my voice in talent shows, release my energy on the dance floor, playing football, running track. The future was my path. But my cousin spent every day paying for his past. By the time he got free from juvie, free at last, his high school years had passed. He took the GED and passed with one try, no studying. My cousin was so smart, a genius budding, nipped by the system, ripped, trying to get funds the quickest way he knew. Had a daughter on the way, so he did what he thought a father's supposed to do. He hustled for loot and got popped for felony too, just like that. He wasn't about to plead not guilty because he knew he'd face the wrath of the judge and the prosecutor who get promotions for taking futures. So Cuz copped the plea, got out and still wasn't free. Now he's 23. Getting in a minor altercation after a traffic violation, strike 3. Now he's 23, facing 25. He's gonna be in jail longer than he's been alive. See, I know it's folks like me in prison. They look like me and they think like me. It's folks that have made mistakes, and you know you can relate because it's folks just like us in prison. So that was the piece.
Amazing,
man. That's true story. That's So that piece came out of a long period of like not being willing to get on stage, and then having an experience.
That was the first one.
That was the first one I wrote, and the first one I started performing.
Unbelievable.
And it came out of a heartbreaking experience, seeing this 11-year-old boy in prison and thinking about my cousin and all the years he had spent in prison. He's out now, and he's gotten convictions overturned, and he's good. He's
That's good to hear.
Reconnecting with his daughter. And so it has an ending, another ending. I sometimes try to tell people that so they don't walk away feeling completely demoralized, because he's rebuilt his life. But that's what it took to get me to be willing to get up on stage, to feel like I had something to say that people needed to hear. And then I got over my fear once I had that. But that spoken word style of rhyming in different places and being rhythmic and using metaphor and using a lot of that was slang, old school slang. I don't know if anybody knows what cheese and cream and all that stuff means now, but back then people would hear it and be like, oh, I know what he's talking about. And so Jake's, I don't know, I didn't mean Jake Scott, but that's the slang for detective, right? So
it's so powerful though. I mean, that form that you just delivered, and like your expressions and your gestures, it all adds into it and makes it that much more than you just writing it down. It's
that spoken word, man. It's a powerful art. It gets made fun of a lot because people like to lampoon it, like this flower comes and blooms every day and it makes me feel some kind of way. Like
right.
Spoken word is part monology, like monologue, part sometimes stand-up comedy, because the thing about slamming, and I didn't like slamming, but slamming because how do you give point totals to poetry? Like, how do you,
Yeah, it's too subjective.
It's completely ridiculous. However, you have 3 minutes or you lose points, and here are the matrices of things you have to do. You have to have good writing, you have to have good stage presence, and you have to say something that people want to hear and want to remember. And those 3 things are all sometimes competing with each other. And you have to strike that balance and do it in 3 minutes in front of people, knowing you're going to be judged by points. And there might be a cash prize for the winner. So all of those different pressures make diamonds. Yeah. And so that's where I cut my teeth. So when I left New Haven and graduated from Yale and went to the Bay Area, I started slamming. I started slamming in Oakland all the time, in Oakland and Berkeley, and I started winning. And that was the first piece I would like start actually winning slams with, because every time I deliver it, I'm just telling you a true story, right? I don't have to like switch my mind into something. I'm just like telling you what happened.
Yeah.
And I've done it so many times now, it's just in my brain. And just a quick little aside, and then I want to share a couple of other things with you. Yeah. How much time do we have? Going. I'm a talker, dude. You know that.
No, I love it. It's great. We have all the time that you need here. It's
all right. Well, I'm not going to keep you all day. It is Saturday. So, little quick aside, Van Jones, who's famous on CNN now, you know, kind of a lightning rod. Some people are always attacking him for different things. Van is a mentor of mine, and I respect him deeply and appreciate him deeply. So I went to work for him at the Ella Baker Center for Human Rights right out of Yale Law School. And my wife reminded me of this today. It's funny. The way I got that job was I'd come out for a summer to work with them. And then when I graduated, went out to the Bay following my wife, who had gotten a fellowship to go work in the Bay. And I was like, I'll go out there. I'll find a job. I just want to be where you are. And I remember meeting, seeing Van and us having a conversation, but I had forgotten this point. She said, you remember in that first conversation with Van, you guys were talking and then you did that poem. I did this poem in that conversation. And then by the end of the conversation, he said, do you have a job? And I was like, no. And he was like, how's 40,000 sound? And I know that doesn't sound like a lot of money now because it's not, and especially coming out of Yale Law School, but I was just like, I don't have a job, and they're doing stuff that I think is really cool, and this guy is really cool, and so I took the job. Do you know, Van, not only did he say, you have the power to be a world-class communicator, this is what you need to do to get better, you need to watch JFK speeches, you need to watch Martin Luther King speeches, you need to watch Malcolm X speeches, that cadence and rhythm. He was like a spoken word poet, like Martin Luther King, like Robert F. Kennedy. He would give me these assignments of people to watch. And then he would put me out there. So there was this one time when we were trying to raise money for a campaign to, shift, it was called Books Not Bars, to shift resources from locking kids up and put it into education and alternatives to incarceration. And we were in Silicon Valley, Los Altos Hills, right? This is like billionaire territory. Mm-hmm. And we walk into this crazy house on the side of a mountain. It's a castle on the side of a mountain. And I'm sitting in a room with Omid Yar, one of the founders of eBay, and all these 100 millionaires or billionaires. And he takes me with him. And he starts talking about the campaign. And then he says, Mike, share that piece. And I spit this piece in that room, and people are crying. And he would recognize abilities and talents, and he would feed it and then kind of send it out there and be like, yeah, you can do it, go do it, right? Yeah. And in meaningful circumstances, not just like, So I'm mentioning that because that moment and a lot of the times that I was allowed to use my creative arts in the midst of the policy work we were doing was ultimately what led me to teaching. Because that was the part I enjoyed, was the crafting of the writing, and it was the working with the youth organizers to use their arts and use their talents to like deliver the message that we were trying to deliver about policy. And when I thought about it, I was like, that's the part I like. The policy, the dealing with the, going to Sacramento, the media campaign and media actions, but the kids.
Yeah, the inspiring people.
Yeah, and so that literally, I 2 years working with him at the Ella Baker Center for Human Rights, and then I taught 2 years of high school English at Balboa High School in San Francisco.
Oh, wow.
And that was the first time I was like, this feels so much better than anything else I do. This feels right. This feels like who I'm supposed to be.
Right.
But I couldn't immediately let the law thing go, because it's like, you got a Yale Law degree, dude. You got to do something with it. You know what I mean? Yep. So eventually, though, I get to Gilman. And Gilman is what solidifies it for me.
How'd that happen? How'd you find out about Gilman and get here?
That's a great question. So, I mean, there's a really specific answer, but then there's a longer kind of meandering answer. But Mr. Finney, who has a big shadow footprint in this area. There's something called the Finney Group, which finds talent. Yeah. So quite literally, they found me, and I was looking. We moved to Baltimore, followed my wife again. She got a job at Garrison Forest, and we were living on the campus. We had moved from Atlanta. We decided together that we were going to go in this area. And so she does diversity work, and she was doing that at Garrison. I'm living on that campus, and I'm like, again, without a job. Well, actually, yeah, that's another story. We're going to leave that out of it. But so I'm looking for a job, connected to the Finney Group. Finney Group is deeply rooted in Gilman world, and they brought me to Gilman. And Bart Griffith, you know what I mean? If I had to lay it on one person, then it was Bart Griffith, because even prior to them having an opening, a year prior to them having an opening, Bart probably took me to coffee 3 times that year, just to say, hey, when something opens up, we want you. Something opens up, we want you. Something opens up, something opened up. He was like, we want you, right? And so Bart brought me here. He brought you here, right?
He brought me here. He's great.
Bart is great, man. He's one of the guys I always admire, respect, and appreciate. Yep. And so that's quite literally it. But the other thing is, like, trying to figure out, what am I here for, man? Like, I'm a person money is not a driver for me. Fame and power are not a driver for me. It's like, I want to find out what I'm meant to do. In my world, what did God make me for? What did my ancestors make me for? What did the universe make me for?
Yeah.
And I, realized...
Where are you most needed, you know? You're most needed inspiring people. That's what you do. I mean, even sitting here and delivering that and talking to you, it's like you probably leave the classroom, or you probably leave whatever room that you're in, and you're like, wow, I feel good, because people are drawn to that. They're inspired by you.
And teaching gives you that opportunity every day. Now, sometimes you leave out of there deflated. I know you know. Because you had this whole plan, and you were so excited, and you thought it would work, and you went in there, and it just falls flat.
Yep.
And it's just like, oh, man, I suck. Why am I not a better teacher, right? Then you have another day where you're like, this is what I was made for.
Right. And those days when you walk out deflated, you're kind of like, I don't know, for me, it's like losing a game. It's like the next week, you're not going to lose the next week's game. Bang. You're not going to go to class tomorrow and have another deflated day. Yeah. That's what it is, if you're driven like that.
Yeah, absolutely. You go back to the drawing board.
Right.
You're like,
what didn't work?
This didn't work. That didn't work. That fell flat. They like this. Can I expand it? It's just working at it. So
it's a process.
It is. And that's the writing process too, right? Like, and this is something we impart upon juniors as well, is like the value of revising and editing. Like, you're not finished. Mm-hmm. Keep at it. Like, look at it. It's not just cleaning up mistakes. It's also, you might need to move a paragraph to another place. You might need to rethink your argument here. You might need to rethink your whole perspective here. Like, that's part of the process. So
the entire structure is off.
You might have to just rewire the whole thing. But I want to share, this is what because you asked, like, the style of the book, right? So this is the opening few lines of JIM HUCKLEBERRY. So you heard that spoken word poem. A lot of rhyming within the sentences, rhythm. Over time, I've written a couple of books, and I'm giving these to you. If I haven't already, I might have. I'm famous for, like, throwing my books on people. But this is a book called The Misbelief Tree, and it's about New Orleans post-Katrina and going back home and dealing with my house that I grew up in, which had been flooded with 8 feet of water. And so this book, is a step forward from that spoken word piece. And so I'm going to read a little segment of this and then a little bit of JIM HUCKLEBERRY, and I'll let you have your Saturday, man.
Perfect.
I don't get
it. It's a treat. It's a treat for.
Well, this is a treat for me, man, because, like, this is I'm a head of school, right? Like, I spend all my time thinking about this school and its present and its future. This is my playtime, right? Like, this is the stuff.
It's your wheelhouse, right?
Yeah, but this is what rejuvenates me. You know what I mean? It makes me feel like, okay, my mind is off of school for a little bit, and I'm doing something that feels, So this is a blessing for me on a Saturday. So, but here's, in this story, I go to my house to watch it being torn down. True story, right? I had to watch my childhood home be torn down, and I'm leaving that situation deeply. I wasn't crying or anything. It was just like, wow, that just happened. I lived in that. lived in that home for most of my life as a child, and it's been in my life for 25 years. And I just watched it get torn down in 20 minutes, torn into a pile of rubble in 20 minutes. What do I do with this? And so I'm back home in New Orleans, and I'm like, I'm gonna catch the bus. And I decided to get on the bus and just ride it and sit down and look at the city and just be present. And so this is me saying, describing the bus. Have you seen her? She is a rolling porch from which we perch and witness the central business district to the city limits, ghost town to Bayou Sauvage. She rolls white with purple, green, and gold stripes like a shoebox Mardi Gras float. Ain't no better way to see the city unless the streets are flooded and you got a boat. And here she goes, coming grumbling, farting smoke. She hobbles and throttles to a stop with a choke. Her hands long and thin fold open with a hiss. Black rubber steps lead up to bliss, a heavenly cool. We may ascend as long as we drop in our doubloons. Rita has squares everywhere, boxes and frames that contain the depth of her perception and the reflection of reality therein. She's made of bolts, joints, and rivets, bent angles dented with divots. A wire draped her entire length, and infinite crevices in which to lose things. She hums like an old lady, with her displeasure, and with agreement in equal measure. She heaves as she sways and glides over bumps, rocking her riders side to side, teeter-tottering on their rumps. So what happens from the storytelling of the poem about my cousin, which still doesn't really have a name. I don't want to say his name. I usually would name it his name, but we had a conversation once and he was like, don't put my name out there. And I was like, got it, dude. You know. But from that to that's a story in which I'm painting kind of big broad stripes about a person's life in comparison to mine. Now I've got, as you as an artist, now I got the pen or something, and I'm trying to describe in detail this one thing, a bus.
Right. Interesting choice of the bus.
Yeah. Well, it's the whole theme of that book is like, Earth is a bus route. Like we're all on the bus together. If you ever caught the bus, and the reason the bus is important to me is I started catching the bus in 4th grade in a different time, right?
Yeah.
Back in the 80s, I can't imagine my 4th grade boy catching the bus in Baltimore, but I did that in New Orleans, right? So, but the bus is very special. Like everybody gets on the bus, and we're trying to get somewhere, right? So if a conflict happens, people will generally try and figure out a way to calm that down, because it's like, do not stop the bus.
Right. It's like crossing Brooklyn Ferry, Walt Whitman. It's the same. It's the same idea. We're all on this. We're all on this journey together.
Yeah, and we got to figure out a way to get along, man, because we can't stop the bus. We got to keep it moving.
Yeah, the bus doesn't stop.
Right. And so but there's a step forward there. And so then Jim Huckleberry, the first lines are, outside a window, against a tree, a man named Jim leaned into heavy sleep. And though he was a powerful made man of great reach, he bore rags which made him look raggedy. So, and then I go into, let me read it, because I don't have this whole 300 something pages memorized yet. Okay. So this is chapter 1. I'm not gonna read the whole thing, just a little bit. Chapter 1, how Jim became a slave. There is no such thing as a slave. There are only humans enslaved, and the perpetual war waged to keep humans in such a state. Outside a window, against a tree, a man named Jim leaned into heavy sleep. Though he was a powerful made man of great reach, his body bore baggy rags that made him look raggedy. Drool dripped through his beard and turned to mud as it mingled with the dust of day and the crusted muck of a meal of mush. Jim chortled with a snort as if he was having a snarky dream of some sort. Maybe it was a fantasy of some slick bit of slapstick calamity that he had caused to befall someone who'd done him evil in reality, like cutting out the bottom of the outhouse so the mistress's bottom would fall in her own trash with a nasty splash. Oh, shut up that yelling. You ain't dead. That's how you about to be smelling. He mumbled and laughed in his head. So in that moment, we understand that Jim is a man. He's a powerful man who's covered in rags, right? And that's the whole, like, you, to me, the message of the book is there. Mm-hmm. Jim is a powerful man with, you know, skill and ideas and all this, and he's covered in the rags of a slave. Right. That slave is a clothing that he wears.
All those qualities you were talking about with Mark Twain describing Jim in this way, but underneath it you have resilience and you have resourcefulness, everything you were talking about earlier. It's right there in those first few lines.
Yeah, and he's a philosopher in this book. He loves his wife. He loves his kids. He's courageous. You know, I'll give, he's developing internal freedom throughout the process of the book. And that means at different points questioning things. That means at different points standing up for himself. And at the end, it means really deciding, I am no longer going to be a slave. I'll die I'd rather die. And at the end, that's you know, what he comes to. And in the end of the, you know, it's a twist on the ending. Is in Huck Finn, he finds out he was free all along, right? Because Miss Watson had died and set him free. So, you know, you could either see it as the whole journey was a waste of time, or as the whole journey was Jim becoming really free. Because you can remove the chains, but if internally you're still captive, you know. So my book is also how he releases himself from captivity, and it's a series of choices. And the last choice is, kill me if you want. I don't care. We going, like, let's scrap. Wow. I'm gonna fight for my freedom.
Wow. So it's an all an internal journey for Jim in terms of his personal freedom and how he feels about himself. Yeah. That's amazing.
And there's people that help him along the way, you know, folks that I made up because, you know, Twain doesn't have them in there. Like other enslaved people, there's someone who's involved in the Underground Railroad who, you know, gives him some guidance. And these three guys he meets who are not, you know, who are named Cassius, Rich, and Red. So this is Cassius Clay, Muhammad Ali, Richard Pryor, and Red Fox.
Oh, wow.
And I name them that because I just want to plant seeds that, like, these amazing black figures who, you know, we can all admire what they do. That genius existed during enslavement. Mm-hmm. And so Muhammad Ali 100 years earlier would have been an enslaved man who was a brilliant poet and could whoop anybody's behind.
Right.
But would he been able to be that in enslavement? No, but he became Muhammad Ali. Richard Pryor would have been this Benjamin Quarles, this beautiful storyteller who was hilarious and talented as an actor, but he would have been enslaved and limited in what he could accomplish. But then we had Richard Pryor. So, you know, there's history in the book. I think it provides kind of breadcrumbs for folks who want to study African American history like that. There are notes in it that explain different parts of African American history. So I want teachers to have this book, and that's what I've decided. I'm gotten to the point where I've stopped sending it out to agents, and I've just started printing it myself, and I'm going to use my own network to get it in the hands of teachers.
If you're a teacher right now and you would like to teach Huckleberry Finn and you want this resource, this book, Jim Huckleberry, where can people find it?
On Amazon is easiest. So again, it's a little lazy on my part because I just don't have, not lazy, I just don't have the time to be a bookseller right now. And Amazon makes it easy.
So easy, yeah.
Print on demand. So just go on Amazon, look up Jim Huckleberry, my full name, Michael Otieno Molina. Otieno spelled O-T-I-E-N-O. Michael Otieno Molina. Mike Molina might come up too. Jim Huckleberry. And again, like, if you are thinking about teaching Huck Finn, if you are teaching Huck Finn, if you refuse to teach Huck Finn, read this book. Mm-hmm. Read this book and see if there's a way you can bring excerpts of Huck Finn back into your classroom, because it's worth it.
Absolutely. Well, Mike, thank you so much for sharing your work. I mean, it's amazing. It's mind-blowing how you just off the cuff memorize and you know, speak the words that you've written over the course of your career here. And it's been so fun talking to you today and getting you back on Gilman's campus. We miss you a lot here. So thanks for coming in for the podcast. If there's anything else that, you know, we can go for days. We can get another Saturday going for sure in the future, but I appreciate you coming on. I appreciate your time. And it's always feel like I'm getting smarter and more intellectually curious being around you. So thank you very much.
Well, I appreciate that, man. Thank you for having me. And, you know, I'm going to steal some of your questions, man. Those are some good questions I'm going to bring to my next workshop. Awesome.
Appreciate it. And Cesare, I appreciate you for everything you're doing with the broadcasting here. I know it's a pain. It was a little bit of a mess when we walked in earlier, but we figured it out. So thank you both for being here. It's been a lot of fun today.
Peace.